Let's talk about the big buzzword of 2022 when it comes to the economy, inflation. Inflation really is picking up. I'm going to talk about inflation in depth when I talk about the war in Ukraine and COVID in China. As we all know, whether it's gas at the pump or food at the grocery store, inflation prices are rising. They're at a 40-year high for consumers. But how does this impact recruiting? And there's two channels I want to talk about how inflation impacts recruiting in this quick overview. One is for lower wage workers, in particular, nominal wages are rising fast. Nominal wages, when I use the word nominal, by the way, that just means not adjusted for inflation. This is just showing you this chart that for all employees, not adjusted for inflation, the average hourly earnings were up 11.1% compared to the pre-pandemic level. That's a pretty strong uptick, but it's even more so for these frontline workers, these production and non-supervisory employees. But you may scratch your head and say, well, what's the point of nominal wages? Well, nominal wages are kind of what workers have in mind, what job seekers have in mind when they're bargaining and requesting either a pay increase or looking for a better offer elsewhere. What about real wages? So this is important. This is a little bit of a confusing chart. It's a lot to digest, and it does not come from me. It comes from an outstanding professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Professor Dubé, an incredible labor economist, has been able to track wage growth along the earnings distribution. So this red line you're seeing across these three charts is wage growth, and then the blue line is inflation. So for the workers who are above the blue line, they're getting real wage gains. And by real, I mean inflation adjusted wage gains. And what the three charts show you is over the last 2 years on the left, and then over the last 12 months in the middle, and then over the last 6 months, just most recently, there on the right. And what this amazing research by Professor Dubé is showing us is that whether you look at it from 2 years or the last 6 months, the lowest wage workers are getting the highest increases. So we're seeing, for example, 15% year-over-year increases in nominal wages for leisure and hospitality workers. Those restaurants and bars and hotels that are just desperate to reopen out of the COVID pandemic, they're giving big pay increases. And often those leisure and hospitality workers are in the lowest end of the spectrum in terms of earnings. So they're the red dots, the red squares that are above the blue line. But all those other workers below the blue line, well, inflation is eating away at their wage gains. What we do see, though, in the last 6 months is that for higher earning workers, there is, if you see there on the right, there's a little red uptick for the highest paid workers are starting to notice over the last 6 months. They're starting to realize, hey, I should ask for a wage increase because inflation is really increasing. The point here is that inflation really is starting to change the recruiting landscape. Inflation is changing recruiting because it changes job seekers' expectations. But inflation doesn't just impact recruiting through wages, it also impacts your costs, your recruiting costs, which I'm going to cover in just a second. We see that online advertising cost actually went up last year. I gave this chart in a January webinar where I teased our benchmark report, but I still have to re-show it because it's so astonishing to me. Because for a decade, online advertising got cheaper every year. The price declined. This is the price paid to businesses, the producer price index for internet advertising. So whether it's Facebook or Google or a job site like Indeed, for about a decade, online advertising got cheaper and cheaper every year until the pandemic hit and things changed. In 2021, things got a lot more expensive when it came to online advertising.